Breaking news. Jerry Yang lands in Australia for his new movie, and the scenes are already stealing hearts. The wind that swept across Sydney's iconic circular quay on a quiet Monday morning carried with it an unexpected energy, the kind that makes even strangers pause mid-step. At first, it was just the distant rumble of an arriving vehicle, then the faint murmur of whispers, and finally, a visible shift in the crowd's attention. Jerry Yang had arrived. An entrance that stopped the city. It wasn't a press conference, and it wasn't an official red carpet, but the moment the black SUV rolled to a stop in front of the Park Hyatt Hotel, camera phones went up like blooming flowers after rain. The tinted door opened, and out stepped Jerry, tall, poised, dressed in a light beige trench coat that caught the golden Australian sunlight like it had been tailored by the dawn itself. For a second, Sydney's skyline seemed to hold its breath. The Opera House gleamed in the background, ferries cut gentle lines across the harbour, and Jerry, with his dark hair tousled by the coastal breeze, adjusted his sunglasses in slow motion. But it wasn't just his presence that electrified the atmosphere. It was what he had come for. Jerry Yang, the heartthrob of Meteor Garden fame and the elusive star known for disappearing from the spotlight for long stretches, was in Australia for his next big film, a romantic drama with a plot so secret that not even the local crew members had been given the full script. The mysterious film that brought him here. So far, only fragments of the story had leaked. It was said to be set against Australia's breathtaking coastal landscapes, blending high-stakes emotional drama with moments of breathtaking visual poetry. One rumor suggested it would follow the story of an exiled pianist who returns to reconnect with his estranged daughter in Sydney. Another hinted at a love story rekindled after decades apart, with the cliffs of New South Wales playing witness to an emotional confession. But what was certain was this: Jerry wasn't here for a cameo or a supporting role. This was his film. His name alone was enough to pull production interest from studios in China, Singapore, and even Hollywood. First glimpses of filming, and that scene by the cliffs. On his first day in Australia, Jerry was spotted at a secluded location near Watson's Bay. The site was cordoned off with security, but onlookers from a nearby walking trail managed to catch fragments of the magic unfolding. The scene was cinematic perfection. Jerry stood at the edge of a dramatic cliff, the Pacific Ocean roaring below him, the sun dipping into the horizon in a blaze of gold and crimson. His coat billowed in the wind as he looked out toward the infinite blue, his expression layered with longing and something deeper, the kind of emotion that translates without a single word spoken. From a distance, the faint sound of piano keys drifted through the air. Whether it was part of the film's score being tested or a live performance on set, no one knew. But in that moment, watching Jerry's silhouette against the dying light, even strangers whispered, "This is going to be legendary." Behind the scenes, Jerry's quiet moments in Sydney. Between shoots, Jerry was seen exploring the city incognito, or at least trying to. One evening, he was spotted at the Rocks, a historic neighborhood with cobblestone streets and warm-lit cafes. He wore a simple grey hoodie and baseball cap, but the careful way he observed the architecture, the soft smiles he exchanged with cafe staff, and the way he lingered by a street musician's performance hinted at a man soaking in his surroundings not just for leisure, but for inspiration. Locals reported that he ordered a flat white and sat by the window for almost an hour, jotting notes in a leather-bound journal. Was it preparation for a scene? Or perhaps Jerry simply found the quiet beauty of Sydney's nights impossible to ignore. A scene that shocked the crew. The second week of filming brought one of the most intense sequences of the movie, a confrontation scene set in a rainstorm. The production team had secured a street in the inner suburbs of Sydney, transforming it into a cinematic storm with rain machines, wind turbines, and atmospheric lighting. Jerry's character was to run after a departing car, pounding on the window to stop the woman inside from leaving. The rain drenched him completely, soaking through his clothes, but he never broke character. The veins in his neck tightened as he shouted lines over the roar of manufactured thunder, his voice cracking with desperation. Crew members later said they'd never seen him so raw, so unrestrained. One assistant director admitted, "We had the take we needed in the first run, but Jerry insisted on doing it again. He wanted it to feel more real, and somehow, the second time, it was like we were all watching someone's actual heartbreak unfold." The Midnight Harbor shoot. One of the film's most anticipated sequences, and possibly its emotional climax, was shot in the dead of night at Darling Harbour. The setting was ethereal, fairy lights strung across waterfront restaurants, reflections shimmering in the dark water, the distant sound of laughter from late-night diners. Jerry walked the promenade alone, dressed in a simple white shirt and black trousers. The camera tracked him from behind as he passed couples, street performers, and the quiet, sleeping city. Then he stopped, his gaze drawn to something across the water. The scene was silent except for the faint hum of the harbour. Jerry's breathing became shallow. He closed his eyes, and a single tear slid down his cheek before he whispered a line that the crew refused to reveal, citing it as a spoiler. Australian wildlife meets Jerry Yang. In a lighter turn of events, Jerry had an unplanned encounter with Australia's wildlife during a location shoot near the Blue Mountains. As the crew prepared for a sunrise scene, a curious kangaroo hopped right into the frame, stopping to inspect the equipment. Jerry laughed, a rare, boyish laugh that made even the most stoic crew members grin, and reached into his pocket for a snack. The kangaroo edged closer, sniffed his hand, and allowed him to pet its head. The cameras weren't rolling for the movie at that moment, but several behind-the-scenes phones were, and the footage is already being whispered about online as the most adorable thing Jerry Yang has ever done. Rumors of a special cameo. Adding to the whirlwind of speculation, there are whispers that Jerry's former Meteor Garden co-star might make a brief cameo in the film. While nothing has been confirmed, a female celebrity from Taiwan was spotted arriving at Sydney Airport just days after Jerry began filming. Fans are now eagerly connecting dots, convinced that this project might not only be Jerry's big cinematic return, but also a nostalgic reunion for millions who grew up watching the iconic drama. Why this project feels different? Those close to Jerry say this role resonates with him on a personal level. Jerry is at a stage in his life where he wants his work to mean something, not just to entertain, but to leave an emotional mark, one insider shared. This film is deeply human. It's about regret, reconciliation, and the beauty of second chances. And Jerry, he's living that truth in his own way. Indeed, his rare public appearances in recent years have only made his return more impactful. Unlike other stars who saturate media with, the air at Bondi Beach was different that morning. It wasn't just the salt in the breeze or the soft hum of waves against the shore, it was the electricity of something ending, something monumental reaching its final breath. The sky was still a deep, sleepy indigo when the first members of the film crew arrived, their breath visible in the crisp early air. The sound of boots crunching against the sand echoed faintly as lighting rigs were wheeled into place. A few curious surfers, board under arm, stopped at a distance, sensing something unusual was about to unfold. At the heart of it all stood Jerry Yang, alone and barefoot, gazing out at the horizon. The waiting silence. The director, a quiet man known for his obsession with authentic emotion, had been unusually subdued all morning. He gave no booming calls or quick hand gestures, just a soft nod toward Jerry, as if acknowledging that this wasn't just another scene to tick off the schedule. The entire production seemed to recognize it. There were no idle jokes from the crew, no loud chatter over coffee cups. Every rustle of the sand, every cry of a distant seagull, seemed magnified in the stillness. Jerry stood in his simple costume, a white linen shirt, slightly wrinkled from the salt air, and dark rolled-up trousers. His hair was unstyled, messy in the way the ocean's breeze naturally dictates. His bare feet pressed into the cold, damp sand. The camera team adjusted their positions slowly, avoiding any sudden movement that might break the fragile atmosphere. First take, and the shell. The scene was deceptively simple on paper. Jerry's character walks along the shoreline, finds something in the sand, examines it, and returns it to the ocean. But to the director, and to Jerry, this was the emotional heartbeat of the entire film. When the camera rolled, Jerry began walking slowly, each step deliberate. The ocean kissed at his ankles, retreating with a soft hiss. He bent down and picked up a small shell. The prop department had prepared several, each one delicate and weather-worn, as if it had traveled thousands of miles to be here. Jerry turned it over in his palm. His fingers brushed along its ridges, his thumb tracing its imperfections. In that moment, something shifted in his face, a flicker of recognition, almost as if the shell was not a prop but a memory made tangible. His lips parted slightly, a soft exhale escaping as his gaze softened. Then, he crouched, letting the shell fall back into the water, his fingertips lingering in the surf before pulling away. When the director called cut, no one moved. The stillness lingered. It was as though the ocean itself had decided to hold on to the moment before letting it go. Second take, raw and unrestrained. But Jerry wasn't satisfied. He approached the director and quietly said, "I think I can feel it more." They reset. The shell was placed back, the tide just right, the cameras rolling again. This time, Jerry didn't just pick up the shell, he hesitated before touching it, his hand hovering over the sand as though afraid to disturb something sacred. When he finally lifted it, his eyes glistened. He swallowed hard, blinking rapidly. The emotion wasn't written in the script, it was Jerry, raw and unfiltered, channeling something deeply personal. He whispered a line that wasn't in the dialogue, a quiet confession only the boom mic caught. Later, The sound team would confirm it wasn't in the original screenplay. But the director, upon hearing it, decided it would remain in the final cut. When Jerry placed the shell back into the ocean this time, he didn't immediately let go. The water washed over his hand, clinging to him before finally carrying the shell away. By the time he stood, his shoulders trembled ever so slightly. The moment that broke the crew. Even seasoned professionals on set, people who had filmed war epics, award-winning dramas, and blockbuster romances, admitted later that they had to look away to hide their emotions. One of the assistant cinematographers, a man who prided himself on being stoic, wiped at his eyes before pretending to check the lens. "It wasn't acting," he said quietly afterward. "It was like watching someone let go of a part of themselves." The scene became more than just a piece of the movie. For the people standing there in the dawn light, it became a memory they would never shake. Jerry's quiet retreat. When the director finally called wrap on the scene, there was no eruption of applause, no loud cheers. Just soft smiles, handshakes, and nods of acknowledgement. Jerry didn't rush to the tent or the warm coffee. Instead, he stayed by the water's edge for several minutes, watching the tide come and go. The makeup artist approached him with a towel, but he waved her off gently, his gaze still fixed on the horizon. Later, someone overheard him murmuring, almost to himself, "This is the last time I'll be here like this." The sunrise gift. As the crew began packing up, the sun finally broke free from the horizon, flooding the beach in molten gold. Jerry, still standing in the surf, was bathed in the light. One of the still photographers, sensing a rare moment, quietly lifted his camera and captured the shot. Jerry's silhouette against the rising sun, the ocean stretching endlessly behind him. It wasn't an official scene, but the image would later become one of the film's most iconic promotional stills. A farewell that felt personal. By 8 a.m., the set was dismantled. The tracks in the sand from dollies and tripods were smoothed over by the waves. The beach returned to being just a beach. Jerry walked back toward the small rented trailer where he had been preparing each day. As he passed the crew, he gave each person a warm smile, shaking hands, thanking them by name, even those who had barely interacted with him. Before stepping inside, he turned back to look at the shoreline one last time. The ocean roared softly in the distance, as if answering him. The rumors that followed. The emotional weight of that final scene sparked whispers almost immediately. Some crew members swore that Jerry's intensity came from a real-life experience, that perhaps the film's themes of loss and reconciliation mirrored something from his own past. Others believed he had been holding on to a personal memory throughout the shoot, one that made the Bondi Beach scene his own quiet catharsis. Jerry, when asked about it in a brief interview later, simply smiled and said, "Sometimes the sea holds more than water." The last night in Sydney. That evening, Jerry was spotted one final time in the city. Not at a press event, not surrounded by fans, but sitting alone on a bench by the harbour, watching the water. A gentle rain began to fall, but he didn't move. His coat was draped over the bench, his shirt slowly dampening. At one point, he pulled a small shell from his pocket, not the one from the film, but one he must have found himself. He turned it over in his hands, the same way he had in the scene, then tucked it back into his coat before standing and walking away. What the scene means now. For those who witnessed it, the Bondi Beach rap scene is no longer just part of the movie's narrative. It's become a symbol of Jerry's dedication, vulnerability, and rare artistry. It's the kind of scene that will likely be studied in film classes, replayed in award montages, and remembered long after the credits roll. And for Jerry Yang, perhaps it was also a quiet farewell, not to acting, but to a chapter of himself that will forever. The sun had long dipped below the Sydney skyline by the time Jerry returned to the Park Hyatt Hotel. The harbour outside was a canvas of shifting lights, ferries moving like tiny lanterns across the water, the opera house glowing in muted ivory, and the city's skyscrapers catching reflections of the moon. He stepped into the lobby quietly, his presence drawing polite glances from the few late-night guests lounging in the bar. Even here, where celebrities often stayed, there was something about Jerry that pulled eyes without effort, a calm gravity that made people instinctively lower their voices. But Jerry didn't linger. He moved straight to the elevators, his coat folded over one arm, his shoes still carrying faint traces of Bondi's sand. The hotel room, a sanctuary above the city. His suite overlooked the harbour, with floor-to-ceiling windows that framed Sydney like a living painting. From here, he could see where the night dissolved into the dark ocean and where the stars began to scatter across the sky. Jerry didn't turn on the lights. The glow from the city below was enough. He dropped his coat onto the arm of the couch and walked straight to the small desk in the corner. It was bare except for a leather-bound journal and a fountain pen, the same ones he had carried since arriving in Australia. He sat, the chair creaking softly beneath him, and opened the journal to a page that already held lines of slanted handwriting. The first entry of the night. He began to write without hesitation. Bondi. 5:45 a.m. The water was colder than I expected. When I picked up the shell, I thought of... The pen paused. He stared at the unfinished sentence, his fingers tightening slightly around the pen's barrel. He leaned back, letting his eyes wander toward the window. The moonlight pooled onto the desk, turning the pages silver. Outside, a ferry's horn sounded low and distant, echoing like a memory. Unspoken memories. What he thought of when holding the shell was not in the script. It was not in any director's notes. It was a memory, years old, of standing on another shore, somewhere far from Australia. It had been raining, and someone had handed him a small shell as a keepsake. He couldn't remember the exact word she had said, only the way her voice trembled as she gave it to him. That shell had been lost long ago. But in his palm at Bondi, holding the prop, it felt as though the years had folded in on themselves, delivering him back to that moment. The middle of the night. Hours passed. The city outside began to quiet, the traffic thinning, the harbour ferrying fewer and fewer lights. Jerry stood and moved to the window, leaning against the glass with his arms folded. His reflection stared back, the faint shadows under his eyes, the slight salt stiffness still in his hair from the morning shoot. He thought about how strange it was to wrap a film. You live in someone else's skin for weeks, breathe their emotions, carry their regrets, and then one day, you're told it's over. The set is gone. The lines fade. And you are yourself again, except maybe not exactly. Some parts stay. The shell on the table. On the desk beside his journal sat another shell, not from the prop department, but the one he'd found himself the evening before. He picked it up now, rolling it gently between his fingers. It was chipped on one side, its ridges soft from years in the ocean. It had no role in the film, no meaning to anyone else. But Jerry found himself reluctant to put it down. A call he didn't make. His phone buzzed once on the nightstand. A familiar name lit up the screen, someone he hadn't spoken to in months. He stared at it until the light went dark again. No call back. No message. Instead, he picked up the pen again and wrote in the journal. Some goodbyes happen in silence. Some stay with you, no matter where you go. I think the sea knows this better than anyone. The weight of the wrap day. The wrap day was supposed to be celebratory. The producer had invited him to a small dinner with the crew, and there was talk of champagne at a rooftop bar afterward. But Jerry had quietly declined, offering thanks and warm smiles before slipping away. It wasn't that he was ungrateful, far from it. He simply needed this night alone, the kind of solitude that let him breathe out the weight of weeks spent holding on to another man's grief. The role had demanded more of him than most. In interviews, he would one day say that playing the character was like opening a door you don't often touch, one that leads to places you think you've sealed off. The night turns quiet. By 2 a.m., Sydney was hushed. The water in the harbour reflected the city lights in perfect symmetry. Jerry moved from the desk to the couch, pulling the shell into his hand again. He turned on a small lamp beside him, the only light in the room now a warm golden pool against the dark. The journal lay open in front of him, but he didn't write. Instead, he simply sat there, listening. Not to the city, not to the waves, but to the quiet inside himself. An unplanned memory spill. He didn't realize he'd fallen into thought until his eyes stung. He remembered the way the shell in the film had slipped from his hand into the water, how the tide had taken it without pause. He remembered thinking, maybe that's how life works too. It takes, it returns, but it never asks. And then he thought of the person from years ago, the one who had given him the real shell. He wondered if she still had hers. He wondered if she'd think of him if she saw the movie. The thought brought a faint, bittersweet smile. The journal closes. At last, he capped the pen and closed the journal, setting it gently on the desk. He placed the shell on top of it, as if the two belonged together. Then he moved to the bed, the sheets cool and crisp against his skin. But sleep didn't come right away. His mind replayed the morning, the golden light on the water, the taste of salt in the air, the way the world had seemed to pause when the director called cut for the last time. A morning no one saw. Long before the city stirred, Jerry woke again. The clock on the bedside table read 5:12 a.m. The sky outside was still dark, but there was a faint hint of blue at the edges. He got up, pulled on a hoodie, and slipped out of the hotel without anyone noticing. A car took him back to Bondi Beach. No crew. No cameras. Just him. The tide was higher now, the waves rougher. He walked barefoot along the damp sand, the cold biting at his ankles. When he reached the same spot where he had filmed the final scene, he stood for a long time, hands in his pockets, watching the ocean breathe in and out. Then, without ceremony, he took the shell from his hoodie pocket, the one he'd found himself, and tossed it into the surf. It disappeared instantly, claimed by the water. Jerry smiled softly to himself, turned, and began walking back toward the car. Why, he'll never forget Australia. In years to come, Jerry would speak of Australia with a fondness that was part nostalgia, part reverence. He would mention the light, so honest, it doesn't let you hide, and the ocean, a mirror you can't look into without seeing yourself. But he would never say what really stayed with him. That morning alone at Bondi after the film had wrapped, the quiet letting go of something only he knew he'd been carrying. And maybe that's why the Bondi Beach scene will always hold an extra weight when audiences see it on screen. They'll watch the character say goodbye.